This list of encounters, which befell my family, dates back to the years 1990 up until early in 1995. At this time, it may be relevant to mention that in this town, all houses are leased for free to the town's inhabitants. Before our relocation into this house, early in 1990, it had been standing empty since 1983. It was less than a week later that my 3-year-old sister started speaking of a woman she had seen in the living room the night before. The woman, as she had described, had blonde hair and no face. Her being young of age, the rest of the family had let the incident slip by without taking too much notice. Relevant was her persistence to this story, and her fear of a built-in backyard barbecue that she desperately wanted removed. What made my mother and myself take notice that perhaps it had not been my sister's imagination after all was an event that had occurred just over a month later. At this time, my mother, my sister and myself had all been in different locations of the house when the front door had opened and we all heard my father step inside and say hello, as he always did. What made this greeting slightly different than usual was that when we all went to greet him, he was in fact not there. What's added to the mystery was a telephone call an hour later stating that my father's car had broken down at work and my mother needed to come and collect him. This incident had been enough reason for my mother to give in and have this barbecue wrecked. Nothing out of the ordinary was found. My personal second encounter happened one evening while my sister and I had been laying on her bed. Her having just drifted off to sleep, my gaze had fallen onto the floor, where I had caught a glimpse of what looked like a sheepdog run across the floor. Sure, it was somewhat smaller, but looked genuine nonetheless. The animal had scurried across the floor and had gone into hiding beneath the bed. That was the last I'd ever seen of it. That was the night before the crows began to appear. In the months that followed these events, they seemed to die down, and very few, including my father, would believe my mother, my sister, and my own claims that there was something wrong at 8 First Street. At this time, however, my parents started growing concerned about my growing fascination with the undead and the macabre, which made sense since I wasn't even 5 years old at the time. The next event that occurred, I believe it was close to Christmas time, involved a beating of drums in the backyard. My sister and myself had been getting up to the normal childhood mischief when a steady beating of drums started ramming on the outside gas bottles. The drumming had been soft and slow at first, then louder, faster, until it had been loud enough for any witness to hear. This had been enough to drive both my sister and myself to tears, and we had fled the house and sat crying in the street until our parents had returned from shopping or wherever it was they had gone. This incident had laid to rest any doubt that my mother may still have attained, although my father remained unconvinced. What events had occurred in the years 1991 and 1992 had in the years past slipped from my memory, with only 3 personal experiences remaining. The first had been while the rest of my family had been in the backyard and I had been alone inside. Until this day, I can still recall an unknown presence that laid its hand down on my shoulder. An icy sensation that now, over 11 years later, I can still remember as clearly as if it was happening right now. It was also around this time that my parents had discovered the artwork I had done with my top room cupboard. 3 walls, 2 doors, all covered in drawings of the dead. It was also in this cupboard that my favorite childhood book had vanished in an instant. This meaning that I had been sitting in the dark reading it with a flashlight, and the very next moment, it was gone. A thorough search of both my parents proved useless, and what happened to it remains a mystery up until today. The third incident I recall happened in the middle of 1992, while my sister was away at camp. This detail I recall particularly well, for it just made it all the more strange that on the relevant morning, wherever I had gone in the house, her voice had been calling out to me. Early 1993, and all others are awoken from the silence by my father greeting incident repeating itself. Also, my father's skepticism takes a knock at this point, as my mother told the story of the night before where our newly acquired Labrador retrievers both looked directly at the roof and started barking at something unseen. The loud sigh that had followed, not even my dad could deny. It was not much later that my mother started speaking of hearing a voice sitting in the hallways late at night. A voice that would die down every time she went to check on it. My sister at this time had also started growing more and more disturbed at what was happening around us, and at one point claimed that an icy presence had been chasing her around the house and had been lifting her up whenever she tried to stop. Although this did sound far-fetched to me, the way she had looked right after, it suggested differently. What made matters worse was another incident which had supposedly occurred while my mother had been collecting me from a friend. On our homecoming, we had discovered my sister and a friend sobbing in the street, spewing claims that footsteps had been heard in the hallway, doors had been opening by themselves, and lights and radios had been switching on and off by themselves. At this time, it was now a mutual agreement. There was something seriously wrong. My own sighting of a teenage boy in the hallway, which I later lay eyes on again, just added fuel to the fire. A summons not much later that my sister had called together involving her, myself, and 2 of her male friends would be the last time that these forces would ever be felt. And after that, it was as if nothing had ever happened. Even the crows stopped gathering. Except one last thing. 2 years had passed since the final sighting at 8 First Street, and I, age 9 now, found myself sitting in the classroom. At this point, a young girl who lived only a couple of houses from me, and coincidentally had the same name as my sister, with whom I nonetheless had never truly spoken with, started telling the class about a ghost of some kind in her house. The stories were exactly the same as mine. It was that same week that the crows again returned. Very few at first, then later, up to 20 at a time. This happened in Gombe, Nigeria. I was about 11 when I decided I wanted to have my own personal room. I had been sharing a room with my elder brother, who is 1 year older than me. I lived in a 3-bedroom apartment with my 2 siblings. My sister was having her own room. Me and my brother were sharing a single room, and our parents were having the other room also. It was a government apartment, allocated to my dad when he was transferred to the state. There was another detached 2-bedroom apartment in the compound which wasn't occupied, so I decided to move there on my own. But the thing is, no one had ever lived there for the past 20 years, until the day we moved that it was renovated. I transferred all my things there and slept peacefully for about a week. The problem started when I got a stereo system and I was listening to music on a high pitch for almost every day. I started having trouble sleeping. I will sometimes wake up and couldn't go back to sleep. That's how I will stay awake until 6 a.m. It went on for like a week. And then, one day, I felt lucky as I was sleepy, so I went to bed early. I was awoken by an intense pressure I felt on my chest, and I was instantly knocked unconscious. I recovered in maybe 5 minutes, and I managed to see a woman sitting there before me. But she wasn't exactly facing me. She was putting on a hijab or imma, and the way she was seated seemed like she was just finished praying, facing the Qibla, where Muslims face to pray. I closed and opened my eyes for like 5 minutes to confirm that I was not dreaming. And then, finally, my attention was drawn to a sound I heard beside me. Before I turned around, she was nowhere to be found. She just disappeared into thin air without any traces. I couldn't go back to sleep for the rest of that night. I covered myself with a blanket, despite the unfavorable condition of the weather. It's during the dry season, extremely hot. And this thought just came to me. Probably, this jinn used to observe her prayers in the house, and the music I played all day long disturbs her. That's why she decided to give me a sign. So, I decided to get rid of the stereo system the very next day. And from that day forward, I was able to sleep peacefully. I told my dad, and he told me that maybe it was the music that attracted the jinn, encouraged me to pray more, and consistently to avoid further encounter. And also, get rid of anything that has to do with music, at least until everything goes back to normal. This took place when I was touring Kenya, Africa, with my parents. We were in Masai Mara, one of the most famous savannas of Africa. We had lodged in a hotel in the savannah. The layout of the hotel was as follows. The main building was at a distance of some 1 kilometer from the lodging cabins. The cabins were amazing. They had a feel as if they belonged to the jungle. There was a river flowing behind the cabin, but it was out of bounds, as it had crocodiles in it. But we got a good view of the river from the balcony of our cabin. It was great seeing crocodiles in their own habitat. The night we reached the hotel, we were all pretty exhausted. The room was cozy, except for one weird thing. It had a deer's head hanging from one of its walls. The hotel was pretty old, so it must be placed there before hunting was banned in Africa. There was a show of Mara people that night which couldn't take place for another month. As we were there for only 3 days, my parents went to the show. I decided to stay back as I was very tired, and the hotel was about 1 kilometer away. I was reading a book, but must have fallen asleep. I woke up about an hour later, which was quite odd, as I never wake up at night once I sleep. My parents were not yet back, and as I rubbed my eyes, I swear, I saw that deer's eyes move. I was completely freaked out and closed my eyes. After some time, I passed it off as an illusion and began to read again. This was when I noticed a pretty odd thing. The curtains of the room were moving as if there was a breeze coming from the windows, but the windows were closed. Suddenly, I felt a shiver run down my spine. I felt as if I was being watched. I felt a weird cold sensation, and I started praying. After a while, the feeling stopped. I kept a pendant of OM we had brought with me, and I tried to sleep. After some time, my parents returned. I didn't tell them about the experiences. I assumed they would not believe me. The next day, I asked our guide, who had become a pretty good friend by then, about the experience. I thought he would know, as he visited that place very frequently. He said that he didn't know anything about that, but I did feel from his tone that he was hiding something. We went on a drive in the savannas, and we came back that evening in a pretty light mood. But when we reached our cabin, we found to our astonishment that our luggage had been scattered, all messed up. We thought that the cleaner must have done it and complained to the hotel management, but they said that, as per their policy, the cleaners strictly do not touch anything belonging to a customer. The receptionist also said that the cleaning was done under supervision. We let go the incident as some misunderstanding. Then, the last and most eerie thing occurred. We were about to go to bed when we all heard someone knocking forcefully at the door. When we opened the door, there was no one. This happened 2 to 3 times. Finally fed up, we shouted to the person who was knocking to stop playing around. No answer. The knocking stopped. We gave it up as some prank and retired to bed. But it must have been about 2 to 2:30 in the morning when I again heard the knocking. Sleeping on an extra bed near the door, so I think I was the one who heard it. I was pretty scared to go out alone after my first experience, and we were even advised never to go out alone at night, as the area had many wild animals. So I woke my parents, and I told them about the knocking. At first, they told me that I was just getting paranoid, and that I should go to sleep. But then, we all heard the knocks on the door. My dad opened the door, only to find that there was no one there. But he saw something moving in the bushes. He came in and declared that it must have been some kid, though I did not feel convinced. I decided that I would rather believe that it was a kid, however. Maybe I could sleep a little easier. The next day we complained about this to the staff. They also said that it must have been some prankster. But then suddenly, my dad asked what kind of moron would have let a kid out at 2 a.m. That set me thinking. I began relating this to my previous experience and felt that the place was definitely haunted. But anyways, we were to depart that day, so I didn't care that much. I didn't think about the incident until the day that we were about to leave Kenya. On the day of our departure, our guide told me that he wanted to tell me something. He asked me not to tell anyone what he was going to share with me. I agreed. He told me about that hotel. He said that a while ago, a boy of about 9 to 10 years had broken the rule about not going out at night and had been killed by a leopard. He told me that everyone said the ghost of that boy still haunts that same room where he was staying the night he died. He said that many of his customers had the same complaints as me, but only those customers who stayed in 2 specific rooms had the experience. It was in room number 153 and 154. I had stayed in room number 154. I have seen shadow people many times, mostly while waking up from sleep paralysis with the feeling of someone being in the room. I don't want to make up stories or memories, but many times I felt that this thing that was in the room was not human and most definitely evil. It usually looked so dark, without any defining features, just a darkness, which was darker than the darkness of the night. Every time I would awake from a nightmare or a case of sleep paralysis, I would see that darkness in front of me. But once I get fully awake, it would disappear, so I just forgot about it until I came in front of a site about shadow people. When I read these stories, I became dazed for days. It wasn't until later that I saw one very clearly. I was reading a book late at night when I noticed something from the corner of my eye. In those days, and I still sleep in the ground or on the floor, I just don't like sleeping in beds. When I turned around to see what it is, I remember very clearly seeing this grey ball of smoke, or what can be described as a great orb, about the size of a football, but a little smaller. It was transparent, almost invisible. When I looked at it, it quickly ran away and hid in the darkness behind a cartoon box where I used to put my books in. It looked like it was floating and running at the same time because it was so close to the ground and it didn't make a sound. It was so clear. I thought that maybe it got startled because I saw it. I still feel them from time to time, but I've never seen them as clearly as that one. The last time was about 6 months ago, when I had sleep paralysis. When I opened up my eyes, while still in that state of paralysis, I saw like a shadow moving very fast. I left the TV on that night because I felt that they were around. But just before I completely woke up, I heard very clearly a growling coming from one side of the room. The closest sound I found was the growling of hippos. There were 2 consecutive ones, but at a much faster pace than hippos. I could not get back to sleep, so I kept listening to the Quran the whole night before I went back to sleep. In early 1990, I went to Orcas Island in Washington's San Juan Islands to stay with family and friends at an older estate nestled on 80 beautiful wooded acres. It was a hot August afternoon, and everyone but myself left to go play tennis. After lounging around a while outside, I got hot and decided to cool off inside. The house was very lovely, so I gave myself a self-guided tour. I ended up in what looked like attic space. I saw a lovely wood-framed mirror, of which I peered inside. Suddenly, I could hear voices around me, wildly talking in an attempt to be heard. Surprised and a bit shocked, I ran downstairs and fled outside. I was not going back in that house alone. When the owner's son returned with my family, I asked who might be haunting this house. I was told that there was a ghost in the house, that it was a woman who had killed herself several decades earlier. She had left this world, but she never left that manor. There was a period in 1995 where a little girl lived in my house. We were laying in bed one morning, relaxing before getting up, and I heard a small girl's voice next to us say, "Mommy?" It was so sweet sounding, though I wasn't afraid. About a month later, my wife at the time was fishing around in the library looking for a pack of cigarettes she'd hidden, when she heard a little girl ask her, "What are you doing?" Startled, she looked up, but of course, found no one. This freaked her out, and she promptly ran out of the house. I don't know who this little girl was, or why she called my wife Mommy, or where she went shortly after those few incidents. I think sometimes only the ghosts truly know why or how they are there. I had taken Danishka to my mother's for a weekend visit. I'm not sure on the year, but I'll guess around 1987. My mother lived in Iowa. Danishka and me were visiting from San Francisco. For years, I had promised Danishka I'd somehow take her for a trek through my haunted neighborhood. This particular time, she held me to it. We began by heading north up my mother's street, which meant we were heading up a rather steep hill. At the top of the hill, we crossed to the opposite side of the road, then entered a yard. It was quite dark. As I groped to find familiar paths from my childhood, we stepped over plant material that felt spongy. I remember thinking things had changed since last I'd made the neighborhood rounds. The yards there, in that old neighborhood, they are massive, with backyards the size of football fields or bigger. Finally, we had made it to the back of said property, and there we found a lovely little bridge crossing a small creek. Then, a short jaunt and we were on another path that led through the next yard, then onto the street north of Mum's place. We headed west, past dark homes resting in ample yards, towards the S-curve in the road. At the lower half of the S, towards the north, was the house with the totem pole. Ah, the totem pole. Let me tell ya, this thing is weird. It doesn't stand upright, but is instead curved like a huge donut sunk half into the ground. It felt cold like ceramic or plaster, but now I guess its composition to be of fiberglass. It was decorated, I use that term loosely, with an array of oddities. A huge ear, about a meter in length, the face of a king off a deck of cards, a large brain, perhaps 5 times human size. Mushrooms, I guess? Gosh, I can't remember it all. The thing looked like an acid trip, realized in an incredibly weird sculpture. We stayed there for a short time. I was wary of the large dog I knew to have patrolled the property some time before. Though it was creepy, we hadn't yet felt haunted. We made off for the church grounds. Once there, we lay down in the parking lot to catch a glimpse of the expanse of stars above. That parking lot, historically, was always where I would acquire, if you have the will, the littles. The little folk, who then would always follow myself or my other guest on the remainder of our exploration. Perhaps more stories for another time. That night, though, we thought that we had heard the littles' telltale whispers and giggles. Something else seemed to pervade. Not a sound, but a sense of darkness. No, worse. It felt malignant, vile, evil. Danishka and me, we sat bolt upright and instinctively began to scoot slowly so our backs were together. There we sat. These littles' whispers and giggles were stifled as birds and crickets before a storm. The silence was obvious and unnerving. We moved to stand, and a growl met our ears. Though, let me explain. It was less a sound than a feeling. Does that make sense? We decided we should flee, and I decided to cut through the Robinsons, a densely wooded yard that opens to a field which leads back to my mother's street. The growl moved over to in front of us. Mind you, I could physically see nothing, but the presence, that was undeniable. I gently touched Danishka on the shoulder, indicating the direction of our next move with a nod of my head. But I did not stray my eyes from the spot my senses told me was occupied by this thing. Suddenly, I burst off toward the road, not even wasting time to go through the Robinsons. Instead, we went through the Kowski's yard, long as the other yards, but not as densely treed. As we moved towards the back, perhaps 100 feet from the house in the side yard, this thing tried to get in front of us. By now it was making such a racket I thought I'd go mad. I can't tell you now the sounds. I can't make my mind remember them. In fact, I wasn't sure at all if the sounds were in my head only and not outside of it. Then I noticed from the corner of my eye that lights had flickered on in the Kowski's house. Heads could be seen peering out towards us through assorted windows. Somehow, knowing that others could hear or sense this thing terrified me even more. I had ducked down to hide next to a truck topper, which had tall grass all around it, where the lawnmower couldn't reach. Danishka dropped to her knees next to me, gasping, "What is that?" For a moment, I didn't feel the thing impeding our path. I took the moment to bolt. I hate to say it, but I was literally out to save myself, not even stopping for a millisecond to check that Danishka was surviving. I made it to the gate that separated the Kowski's yard from my mum's neighborhood across the street. I was freaking out, not having an easy time with the latch, when again, the thing loudly made its presence known. Finally, the gate was open, and we were sprinting across the expansive lawn towards the driveway. A long and winding drive. The formal garden surrounding the house is separated from the front by a long line of trees, which run parallel with the creek. As we approached said line of trees, running so fast, nary a step touched the ground, we awoke what sounded like hundreds of sleeping birds, who all at once fled from the trees, screeching and making horrid sounds. Then, I wasn't sure if it were birds I heard, or the thing which pursued us, or both. I can't explain or describe it. Everything just felt twisted, not real. Perhaps it was just terror. Finally, out of the trees and making our way towards the front fence/gate, an imposing, gothic-looking black iron jobby that was closed. We didn't break step until we hit the gate and made it to climb over. I felt as the men in The Omen who were running from the evil dogs in the cemetery, and had the terrible thought that I would impale myself. I managed not to. We ran across the street towards the warm glow of the lights lining my mother's front walk. Then, could detect the comforting sound of my dog Benji barking in the backyard. We ran up the drive, and we crashed through the back gate to collapse on the lawn chairs, panting, laughing, almost crying, and trying to even get a word out. As we got our thoughts together and could finally talk, we sat and related in hushed voices what each other had felt and seen, etc. As we did so, we could hear that my horses in the pasture behind my mum's house had come up to the fence, which kept them out of the backyard proper. My dog trotted down the stone path to say hi to them, and we followed. Eventually, we stood at the fence, petting and cooing to the animals. Before me was Zeus, our largest stallion. I remember now, hindsight, that he was acting odd. They all were. Skittish, but at the time, I guess I was trying to make things as normal as possible, and I shook it off. Presently, Zeus took a long step back, an awkward movement, because he did so with only one leg. He then looked straight at me, into my eyes maybe, I don't know, too dark, and commenced urinating, a long and drawn-out piss. His stance was, how shall I say, almost threatening, like he was a bull preparing to charge. As Danishka and me and poor Benji were witnessing all this, this thing dropped down on us from above. There were no trees directly above, just an old-fashioned type electrical line. It dropped to the ground, directly between Zeus and me, but on my side of the fence. When I say it dropped, I mean we could hear it, feel the thud reverberating through the ground at our feet. Again, let me remind you, I could physically see nothing, but my brain attempted to create a mass in the general vicinity of this thing. Still, I really don't remember physically seeing anything. Anyway, the horses, including Zeus, erupted into wild neighing, bucking and kicking, then scattered as if wolves were after them. Absolutely speechless, I looked at Danishka, my mind groping for any kind of reasoning. Benji broke me out of this. Benji was barking and making for the house. Again, we followed him. The flight was excruciating. For a moment, I could not see the house, nor the back porch, our supposed safety. Instead, I saw myself from behind, running in panic, as though I saw through its eyes. We made it to the porch. Benji was already inside via his own doggy passage through the back door. I was tempted to jump through it myself, but my higher logic convinced me to use the doorknob instead. Danishka and me, we didn't stop until we'd run to the front of the house, to the front and formal living room. Once there, we were oddly calmed, collected, moving pointedly. I went to the secretary in the corner and removed a pen and paper. Danishka switched on the stereo and retrieved a bottle of Merlot from the cabinet. I sat on the sofa, pen in hand, with a mind to write of our experience. Danishka sat on the floor near the serving/coffee table, and she poured us both a glass of wine. Though out of breath, we refused to show it. We were fine. My cats, one by one, began to saunter into the room, noticing that we were out of sorts, but not wanting us to think that they cared enough to show any concern. Just when everything was beginning to feel all right, a huge cat fight erupted under the sofa upon which I sat. I mean, you could see fur flying out from below, And of course, you know how awful is that sound. There was no doubt in my mind, at that time at least, my cats were fighting the thing right underneath me. Now that's where my story ends. I know Danishka and me took that bottle of wine to my bedroom, where we sat with every single light on, including closet lights. We did not speak further of the incident. We simply waited for the sun, and thankfully, that wait was uneventful. I did eventually finish penning the whole story, by hand, somewhere in the region of 20 pages front and back. I held onto it for many years too, though now, since I bought my house in '98, I have been unable to locate the sheets. Alas, I've done my best in this retelling. I have many ghost stories to tell, and I will post them here separately. This is the most impressive one though. I was asleep one night when I awoke, realizing that I could not breathe. Now, I have several cats, and on occasion, they will lay down on my face while sleeping. Such is their way. As a wise person once told me, the one thing to always remember about cats is, if they were bigger, they would eat you. So, I assumed that this is what was happening. However, when I was fully awake, I realized that I could not move. And furthermore, that my pillow, it was covering my face. I was lying on my side, and the pillow I had my head on was folded up over my face. So once again, I assumed a cat had slipped under there. But that wasn't it. I began to panic because I could not move, and I also could not breathe. Now, the pillow wasn't just covering my face, it was being pressed into my face. I finally was able to, using all my might, move my head just a little bit back and forth. After a couple of seconds of that, the pillow suddenly dropped from my face, and standing right there next to my bed was this tall, thin thing, all in white, like a skeleton in a long, heavy, hooded robe that covered all but the hands. Where the face should be was just ethereal whiteness. Within a split second, this thing reached down and grabbed my bedspread and pulled it over my face, holding it tight. Again, trying to suffocate me. I thought to myself, this thing is going to kill me. I have to do something. But again, I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. Then I remembered that I had been studying up on auras, and I realized this was my only chance. Again, with all my might, I envisioned this energy field around me. And when it had solidified, I pushed it as hard as I could towards this thing by my bed. Suddenly, the bedspread flew off my face and nearly off the bed, and I was able to see this thing being flung back to wherever it came from. It just quickly flew back away from the bed, getting smaller and smaller until it disappeared. When it was gone, I was suddenly able to move again. So, I immediately jumped out of bed. I flung on all the lights and I started screaming and crying, still frightened out of my mind. I could not stop screaming and crying about it for 2 days. I had truly felt like someone had come into my house and tried to murder me. I couldn't go to work. I couldn't do anything. It took about a week for me to be able to go back to my bedroom, and then about a month for me to be able to sleep without having all the lights on. People who know about this event ask me how I could still live there. I tell them, if something evil is out to get you, it will find you wherever you are. Here are some random little ghostly events that have occurred in my current apartment. The first ghost experience I ever encountered there was awaking one night to find a full-size horse standing by my bed. Quite a sight to see in my tiny apartment. I screamed, "What is that?" And then I noticed there was kind of like a cowboy figure on the horse, dressed in the traditional Old West garb. He tipped his hat to me, lightly kicked the horse with his spurs, and the horse sauntered off through the wall. Now, I live on the second story, and the wall the horse went through was an outside wall. So people always ask me, well, didn't the horse fall once it was outside? I don't know. It's a ghost. If it can go through a wall, do you think a little thing like gravity would be a concern? Another time, I awoke to find a guy standing at the foot of my bed. He was dressed in this dark blue checkered shirt and khaki pants. He was around maybe 50, kinda pudgy. He didn't seem threatening at all. Once he realized I saw him, he just disappeared. Another time, I was trying to fall asleep, and I noticed this lump under my blankets, moving from the edge of the bed towards me. I assumed one of my cats had crawled under there and was approaching me, so I put my hand out to pet it on top of the covers, saying, "Oh, what a cute kitty." However, as soon as I put my hand down for the pet, this lump disappeared. Nothing was there. That one totally freaked me out because it had been a pretty big lump. In my bedroom, I have a huge window that takes up at least half of the wall. Living in the middle of the city, there is always significant ambient light coming through that window, not to mention my neighbor's very bright security light that he always has on. Anyway, one night, as I turned off the light to go to sleep, suddenly, I was thrown into total darkness. Like, have you ever been deep in a cave where no light can go? The kind of darkness that is total, complete, and threatening. So, I immediately turned the light back on, and I looked out the window to see if maybe the power had gone off in the city or something. But no, all of the lights were still on, shining through my window. So I turned the light off again, and total, evil darkness again. It was almost like being thrown into another dimension. So, the light came on immediately again, and stayed on the rest of the night. Another time, I awoke just in time to see this hairy thing running at me, carrying some kind of stick over its head. It was like he wanted to hit me with it. I screamed, and the thing stopped and was suddenly flung backwards, getting smaller and smaller until it disappeared. Now, most of these things have occurred at night, so skeptics could say, "Oh, you were tired, so you imagined it." However, several times during the days in my living room, there will be this little cloud of small lights appear, swirling around near the ceiling for several minutes at a time. Since I am usually engrossed in my TV show, my cats are normally the first ones to notice them. They will all run to just below the cloud and all stand up on their hind legs, reaching out with their paws towards the lights, chattering the way cats do when they're excited. Then, just as suddenly as they arrived, they are gone, and the cats go back to their business, sleeping and destroying everything I own. Oh well, they're great company. Hey guys, before I go, I would just like to give a big shout out and thank you to my Patreon supporters, Cerise Death, King Jim 97, Endos, Ellie Cat 80, Michael Sullivan, and Math Bowers. If you're interested in becoming a patron or channel member, do check out the links down in the description. Alrighty guys, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next video. Good night. My friend Janine and I worked in an old hall in Lowestoft, Suffolk, in the early 90s. I was living about a mile from the hall. We finished work at about 11 p.m. and we were going back to mine for a drink. There we were, me wheeling my cycle, and her holding a plate with a slice of lemon meringue pie on it, walking down an unlit dual carriageway. Halfway down this road was a lay-by hidden from the road by a small island covered in trees and bushes. We heard a van pull into the lay-by, and a minute later, we heard a noise behind us. Looking back, we saw a man pretending to pee while looking back the way we had come. Strange. He turned and he looked straight at us. He jumped onto the road and he started to chase us. We shot off down the road. It was late, with hardly a car about. Janine pulled me across the road in an attempt to force a car to stop, but they just swerved around us, beeping their horns. The road was empty again. The man was gaining on us. My bag had caught on my bike, so I had to haul it on my shoulder. He reached out and he grabbed my hair. I swung my bike and I knocked him back. Running across the road, we saw an oldish man walking down the central reservation, and we ran towards him, shouting for help. He was dressed in weird clothes, a tweed suit, and the trousers came to just below his knees, like +4s. We looked back. The guy had seen him too, and had turned around and was running back to his van. We were only about 10 feet from him, but the old guy seemed to not see us. and he kept looking into the distance as though nothing was happening. This infuriated us. We ran towards him, demanding to know what he was playing at. Then just as we reached him, he disappeared. Absolutely gobsmacked, we ran on until we got to the farmhouse where I lived and called the police. The guy who had chased us fit the description of someone who had attacked a girl in the next village to us. One of the police women told us that many years ago, a man and his family had crashed not far down the road, and that he had tried to walk to the village for help but died of his injuries before he got there. He had been seen quite a few times before. He may not have saved his family all those years ago, but he sure saved us that night. The upside of this is that all through this, Janine managed to keep hold of that pie. Nothing has ever tasted so good. About 9 years ago, me and a mate used to go to this caravan site a couple of miles up the coast from where I used to live. During the summer, we used to drink in the site's pub called the Mermaid, booze on the beach and chat up the holiday makers' daughters, etc. One year, a couple of months after the summer crowds had left, we had gone to the bonfire that they have there to watch the fireworks and generally just join in with the festivities. We ended up staying late, just wandering about the site, before finally ringing a taxi and waiting for it outside the Mermaid, inside the doorway of a rundown toilet block, near to the edge of the cliff. It was quiet, but there were still a few people about. Anyway, after a couple of minutes of us standing there, I had seen something at the edge of a cliff. In a shallow ditch, around 30 yards away, it looked like the start of a fire, and I mentioned it to my mate. I remember saying, "What the hell's that?" And I think his response was something along the lines of, "I don't even want to think about what that might be." We carried on watching, and the fire grew, until finally, something blue became apparent in its center. I couldn't tell what it was at first, but it quickly materialized. It, or rather, he, was a man in a blue boiler suit with shoulder straps. He was wearing a tan cowboy hat and an orange shirt, and he was digging hard into the ditch. As he dug, he got lower, until around the point only his torso was visible. The image seemed to evaporate, the fire closely following suit. Me and my mate did not speak during the sighting, and I don't think we spoke much on the subject on the ride home, but whenever I talked to him about it, after that, he'd always make a joke or fobbed it off. I reckon some people just refuse to believe in ghosts. As it is, I haven't seen this mate for years, and that experience is the only thing I really remember regarding him. That caravan site, Toonstall, near Withensea, near the city of Hull, England, and that, what I can only describe as a spirit. Some woman who I told about it in a nightclub some years later said maybe it meant something. I can't think what, but sometimes I think maybe she had a point. I was 14 years old at the time of my first sighting/encounter with ghosts. My father and stepmother had just purchased this old farmhouse outside the town of Ford, right next to the river of Arun in Sussex, England. It had a lot of land with it, including river rights. Being the oldest boy with 2 brothers and 3 sisters to look after, I was always the babysitter when my parents went out. It was on one of those nights, just after putting my brothers and sisters to bed, that I could sense I was being watched. I grabbed the poker, and after stoking the fire in the living room, I began checking all the rooms, still holding that poker in my hand. After not finding anything or anyone, I calmed myself down, put the poker back by the fireplace, and I decided to go to bed. Coming out of the living room, I grabbed a hold of the banister and started making my way upstairs to my room. Climbing the stairs, I looked up and then froze on the spot. There at the top was a transparent figure of a man dressed in pirate's clothing, looking right down at me. I know it sounds cliche, but I could see right through him, as there was a picture on the wall behind him that was still very visible. He was clean-shaven, and he wore a bandana on his head, a sword on his side. In his right hand, he held a wine goblet that he would drink from. He just stood there, looking at me, and then he smiled. His mouth was moving, as if he was speaking to me, but I could not hear any words. He raised his goblet, as if to toast to me, and he drank from it. He then turned around and vanished through the wall. When I told my dad of what I saw, he just laughed and said that he also had a visit from him, and that it won't be the last. He then went on to explain that the farmhouse we moved into used to be a favorite place for pirates to hide out many years ago, and apparently still do. I recently went on holiday for a week with my partner and my parents to one of the Canary Islands. We rented a private villa, and when we arrived, I immediately did not like the room myself and my partner were staying in. I got a very peculiar feeling that I had never experienced before. It was not a bad or frightening feeling. It's just this odd, uncomfortable sensation. When we arrived, we sat down in the kitchen for a cup of coffee. I remember sitting at that table and just glaring constantly into our room, almost daring someone or something to walk past the door. It was odd, because at the time, I didn't know why I felt so uncomfortable there, as I had never previously experienced anything supernatural whatsoever. I just knew that something was not right. Throughout the holiday, I awoke continuously throughout the night, sometimes 4 or 5 times, with the feeling that someone else was in that room. I never had a decent night's sleep. One night, I awoke right at the edge of the bed, with the same familiar feeling of a third person in the room. The little bedside table next to our bed was gently thudding against the wall. I watched it for a few seconds, wondering what could be causing it. I even shuffled right away from it, over to the other side of the bed, just in case there was any slight chance I was doing it myself. However, as I had expected, the table carried on thudding against the wall. It was not violent, just a gentle thud, thud, thud. And I did not get a frightening feeling at that time. To be honest, I was that tired in that moment, I thought nothing of it, and I fell back asleep. The next morning, when I woke up, my feelings of something not right in our room was confirmed. But for some reason, I did not tell my partner or my parents anything about it. After all, who has heard of a haunted modern Spanish villa? On the second night, I woke up a lot more than usual because my back had gotten burned that day and I was sore. So I kept a bottle of after sun cream on the bedside so I could keep reapplying it throughout the night. One of the times that I woke up, I put some after sun on and I leaned forward in the bed to rub it into my back. I just so happened to glance in the big long mirror we had on the wall, and I saw something very peculiar. Even though it was dark in the room, I saw very clearly a tall, thin man, and he was walking towards the mirror. He was quite a distance away, as if he was reflected from the bathroom, coming into the bedroom. He was wearing black, but he had a long, white frilly thing running down his middle, as if he was wearing a white frilly shirt and a black jacket. His hair was strange. It was cut just above shoulder length, but it was curled up all around the bottom in a kind of a bob, and it was ginger. This all happened in a matter of seconds. I turned around to look around the room, but it was dark and appeared empty. I woke up my partner to ask for the time. She said it was 6:30 a.m. I asked her what time it would start getting lighter, and she said she didn't know. So I turned on the light, and eventually I drifted back to sleep. Later that morning, I felt I had to mention all this to my partner and my parents. I told them everything that had happened. That night was the last night, and I kept the light on, but I couldn't get to sleep. I wasn't scared to be in there, but I didn't particularly want to see him again. I was scared to open and close my eyes. It sounds daft, but as it was my last night there, I was a bit worried that he might do something to wind me up. So in the end, we took all the bedclothes into the living room and we slept on the sofas. Nothing happened that night, and although I was on my guard a lot and woke up several times, I felt relieved to be out of that bedroom. We've been home for a few weeks now, and the other day my partner admitted that she also had an experience. She said that on one night, when we were asleep, she suddenly had a mini 4-second dream of a shadow of a man in our bathroom crossing the room. She said that she didn't want to tell me when we were on holiday, in case it made things worse. I have emailed the company we rented the villa from to ask if any other guests had reported anything unusual in the villa. This all happened during this past summer here in Cardiff, UK. At about 7 p.m, my friend and I decided to go into the woods at Heath Park, as we were very bored that day, and I believe it was one of the hottest days on record for the UK, so we were just all hot and bothered, looking to do anything. We trekked into the woods until we came to this huge tree. We sat down by the tree for nearly an hour, cooling down. It was also next to a large pond. At about 9 p.m, we realized that it was very nearly dark, so we decided to make our way back home. We had about a 15-minute walk to get back out of the woods, and nothing strange had happened until I noticed a figure about 200 yards away from us, back from where we had just come from. I thought this was strange, but thought nothing more of it. About 4 or 5 minutes later, I looked back and saw the figure again, but this time it was closer. I thought this was strange, as there were no people close to us when we were at the tree, so I decided to tell my friend. Josh thought I was messing around with him and did not believe me at all. This was much to my frustration, of course. About 3 or 4 minutes later, again, I looked to the side and the figure was about 50 yards away, only it was in amongst all nettles and bushes. I was very scared at this point, as we weren't even halfway through the journey, and it was very nearly dark. I told Josh to keep looking around and to speed up our walking pace. A few minutes later, Josh saw the figure on the other side of us, and we were both really, really scared. So we ran. When we got into the open field which would lead us to a road, we ran about halfway into it and looked back, and we both saw the figure standing on the edge of the woods. We ran all the way home. The figure that we saw was very weird, because every time I saw it, it was perfectly still, like unnaturally so. No person could possibly stand that still. We could not make out the face or the gender of this thing. It was standing in what looked like a blue cloak. I have been back to that spot a few times since that day, and nothing strange has happened since. But both me and Josh, we refused to go back there at dusk, ever again. I lived in the second floor flat with both of my parents. When we first moved in, a neighbor told us that we should not move in there, that the flat was used for constant parties using the Ouija board. My dad did not take any notice of the neighbor at the time, and I was about 12 years old, so I had no idea about any of it. 3 nights after we moved in, it began. We had a plastic runner in the hallway to protect the carpet. We all had just gone to bed when we heard something running up and down the hallway on the runner. My dad jumped up and turned on the light. As soon as the light came on, it stopped. My dad thought someone must have broken in, so he checked through the flat. But there was no one, just us. He turned the light back off. I went to sleep that night in my mum and dad's room. 10 minutes later, something was running madly up and down the hallway again. My dad jumped up and ran to the hallway. The running noise stopped. My dad was now standing in the bedroom doorway. He swore and shouted for it to go away, which made it angry because we heard the kitchen cupboards opening and slamming shut and our thick mahogany chairs sliding across the kitchen floors. My mum started screaming in a state of shock. My dad turned on the lights. The cupboards stopped banging and chairs stopped moving when my dad went to the kitchen. All the cupboards were open and the chairs were in the middle of the kitchen. We endured years of this. My dad was the first one to see the spirits, and I was the second to see them. There were two. My mum only heard them, never saw them, which was a good thing because if she did, she would have probably had heart failure. The one that haunted me the most wore this black robe with a hood and no face beneath it. He had big hands, like shovel size, and he wore a big ruby ring. He was 7 feet tall, and his shoulders were wider than the doorway. Honestly, he looked like the Grim Reaper. The other spirit wore a white robe and was the same size as the other one, and had a white ruffle round his neck. We heard voices arguing. One was telling the other one, "You've had your fun. It's time for you to go now." My mum was a bag of nerves. She went to the vicar. They sent people to see if we were mad or if it was real. One day after, they gave the go-ahead for the exorcism. I am now 30 years old, and I live in my own house. The other week, my son came screaming down the stairs, saying he saw a man in his room. When he described it, I knew what it was. My son is 10 and scared to go upstairs on his own now. I swear it's like it's punishing me. It made my life hell for years, but I got used to it. I thought the exorcism got rid of it, but now my son has seen it, and I know that he has not heard me talk about it, because I don't. It's my biggest secret. I have read many stories about ghosts, sleep paralysis, etc., and can see quite a lot of logic. I feel I have to post this story in order to get my own answers based on other people's experiences, as it's not easy to just ask the right person. For the last couple of years, I have been experiencing this strange feeling whilst I have been sleeping. It's probably happened about 15 times all in all, and I am 22 years old. Now, when I am asleep, I might be dreaming of whatever, and then all of a sudden, I feel some kind of presence around me. Now this feeling is very nice, and it makes me feel very relaxed. I also feel like I'm in the state of waking up. Then, all of a sudden, I feel this immense pressure on my 2 shoulder blades, pushing me down into the bed. I always sleep on my stomach, by the way. Now, normally you can wake yourself up from dreams, but from this, I can't. I am fully aware that something horrible is going on. I feel my heartbeat race, and I start to panic. Nothing I can do seems to stop it, and as I can't see what's going on, it's even worse. I can, however, clench my fist, but it's a real struggle. Then all of a sudden, it stops, and I wake up feeling very scared. Now, I'm not the type to get scared easily or anything, but it's just how I feel. Another time, just before the warm, safe feeling, I felt what can only be described as dog feet walking across my bed and blanket. Then, it turned into another episode with the same results. But this only happened once. I have since moved out with my partner, and it's happened again, which leads me to believe it might be sleep paralysis. However, I have never felt so much terror before in my life as when this happens. I feel like I am being tricked to feel safe, and then set upon by something very nasty. What I am really hoping to achieve is that someone might be able to relate to this and help in finding out more about it. An interesting point to add is that my dad has also suffered from this. When I told him briefly about it, he explained to me in detail, and it was scary how similar the symptoms were. So, if anyone can shed some light, I would be truly grateful. Thank you for hearing my story. I live on an almost 300 years old farm. My house was actually built by monks. I have always felt very weird things in my house, like the occasional cold spot and noises. But I always thought that it was in my head. A few years back, when I shared a room downstairs with my sister, the room I am currently writing this story in, I saw something. It was boiling hot that night, and I was desperate for a drink. I sat up and grabbed my drink. When I took my first sip, I saw something at the bottom of my room, and I was petrified. It wasn't any particular shape, just like a really clear, white mist with a very strange movement in the middle, going outwards. It is so hard to explain. I slowly put my drink back, and I slipped under the covers and did not look back up. My family didn't believe me, of course, so I invited a friend around to sleep, not telling her about what I had seen. That night, she woke me up crying, saying she couldn't sleep on her own, so we moved into the living room. The next morning, she told me that she had seen something very similar to what I had seen, but this time, it moved out into the hallway, and it was gliding very slowly. I don't know what it is, and I hope that you guys believe me, because I wouldn't make this up. If you have any ideas, it would be very much appreciated. I grew up in a 200 years old cottage in South Gloucestershire, southwest England. My parents spent 4 years, from 81 to 85, renovating the cottage to a livable standard, as it had been empty for a few years before. The previous resident had been an old lady. The original house had only 2 upstairs rooms. Both were bedrooms in which you had to pass through one to get to the other. My dad added a bathroom and another bedroom to the rear of the house. He also added a landing so each room could be accessed separately. Strange things began to happen once we moved in there. My parents had one of the bedrooms at the front of the house. The other was the spare room for guests, and I had the new bedroom to the rear of the house. In the mid-1980s, my grandparents had come down from Yorkshire with my aunt, who was living in America at the time. My grandparents stayed in the spare bedroom, and my aunt stayed with me on the bottom of my bunk bed. After everyone had gone to bed, my aunt awoke to the sound of my bedroom door opening. My door was the typical old cottage style, with a latch where you have to press down on the outside of the door and a lever on the inner side goes up, allowing you to push the door open. The door opened and then slowly closed. My aunt called out, "Hello, is anyone there?" Without reply, she put it down to a draft and went back to sleep. A while later, she woke to the bed violently shaking. Naturally, she thought it was me playing games, and she asked me to stop. Realizing that I was fast asleep, she then called out, "Whoever you are, just stop it." This then stopped the bed from shaking. I am not sure if she slept after this, but I know it was many years before she would talk about it. Several years later, in the 1990s, she came to visit us again. I had since got one of the bigger bedrooms at the front of the house, and my aunt reluctantly had to use my old bedroom, which had since become the spare room. She awoke in the middle of the night to find a lady in a bonnet at the bottom of her bed, staring at her. I have never heard what else happened. She never talked about it. For the past 10 years, I have lived in St. Anne's in Nottingham, England. Our area is called Stonebridge Park. I may have lived here for 10 years, but this story has only been happening for the past 2.5 years. The street I live on is directly next to Nottingham's famous Stonebridge City Farm. Between our street and the farm is a public pathway that the locals call the Farm Pathway. This pathway runs right through the farmland and is a public access way to other housing estates. Well, it is on this pathway that the wailing woman is heard. To be honest, when it first started in summer 2004, we actually thought it was a crazy person going round. But we soon discovered it was not. The latest encounter was in the early hours of 11th January 2007 at around 3:25 a.m. She is heard in two different ways. The most common heard is that of this woman shouting for help, crying out in desperation. Sometimes a man's voice accompanies hers, but the male voice is always much quieter. The other way she is heard is much more disturbing. Her pitiful moans of anguish and pain echo through the air, shattering the night silence. The second time we ever heard it, in 2004, me and my dad looked out of our bathroom window, which overlooks the path. The woman's cries for help were so close, coming from the path. We expected to be able to see her, but nothing was there. Yet, the cries continued. Half-hour later, the police arrived. Someone had obviously called after hearing cries for help. The police concluded that the caller was a hoax, but we insisted the cries were there and that we had heard them. The exact same cries started a couple of weeks later, and me and Dad went around to the farm path to see who it was. But as with before, the sound continued, but no visible person was around. The cries once again just stopped dead. It was over a year, and we had forgotten all about the cries for help. But it was in summer 2005 that it started up again, at exactly the same time as the previous year. It was then that me and Dad concluded and believed that these cries were some sort of residual haunting. The fact that the voice was always the same, always said the same things, and that no visible person was ever present is what led us to believe this. Another thing we noticed is that about 95% of the time, the sound only occurred on Fridays and Saturday nights. It was another great amount of time before we heard this wailing woman again. This time, it was different. Her cries of pain, anguish and heartbreak echo through the night. I must say, this is very disturbing to hear, especially in the middle of the night. What is odd is that, despite the sounds being different, you can tell it's the same woman calling for help. Anyway, coming back to the present, these cries started again at 3:25 a.m. on the 11th January 2007. It was only last week that the cries for help were heard, and now we have the moaning. Is the moaning the spirit of the woman actually haunting the pathway? It is my own theory that this woman was murdered by her husband. If this is true, then it is sad, as her long-departed ghost seems to still be suffering. Here are the two encounters I've had with ghosts. In the house I first lived in, I was there from when I was born until I was about 8. My first experience with ghosts was on Easter morning when I was 7. Me and my brother had awoken early, as you tend to do when you're excited. We made our way downstairs and onto the landing. For some reason, we both became very still, and we both heard a very loud, deep voice of a man say, "You're dead." My brother and I both remembered this vividly and agreed that the voice had not been inside our heads and that it had come from a few feet above us. The ceiling was very high. That was my first experience with ghosts. The next story, I did not experience firsthand, but it did occur in the same house. My younger cousin had just been born. Me, my brother, mother and father had gone on holiday, and my uncle said that he would come around to our house every few days to feed the fish, water the plants, etc. My uncle brought my newly born first cousin with him. He was no older than a few weeks. My uncle left my cousin in the middle of the floor in the lounge and went to check that everything in the house was okay. When he returned to my cousin, All the toys and books that we kept in a big box had been scattered everywhere, all around the room. There was no way in hell that a baby could have done that. He couldn't even crawl yet. Thankfully, I no longer live in that house. In my town, there is this huge mansion on the edge of the park. It's open to visitors and people who want to walk through its many rooms. There are tours, etc. When I was about 10, my class in school went to look around it one day. As with most big houses, there are ghost stories surrounding it. The story was that a young woman lived there, and her father did not approve of her lover, so she hung herself in the main room from the banister on the balcony. Now, you know what kids are like. All the guys in my class were saying they saw a ghost, blah blah blah. I didn't really believe it at all, until I went to use the bathroom. I walked into the bathroom. It was empty, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and suddenly, all the doors on the stalls slammed shut and locked. All of them, at the same time. Obviously, this scared the hell out of me, so I bolted out the door and went back to my class. No one believed me though. I went back home at the end of the day and decided that I would go back to the mansion on my own, have a look around. I looked through most of the rooms. I had a weird feeling, as if I were being watched the whole time. It was very cold, even though this was during summer. I went to that spot where the woman had supposedly died. After a while, I found a circular room draped in red curtains, and in the middle of the room was a great big grand piano facing with its keys away from me. Then I heard music. A slow, sad tune emanated from the piano, and I heard a woman singing. She sang, "Servomo aminis vovosis o piano." I didn't know what it meant at the time. The red drapes began to blow, as if there were a high wind in the room. The music stopped, and I stood for a moment, then took a pen from my pocket and wrote the bizarre words she had sung. Apparently, it is loosely Latin translation for "Save my soul, voice of the piano." Someone must have pulled the emergency chain for the train, I thought, as it stopped so suddenly. The sudden cessation of movement caused us all to fall forward. Shaken, we stood up and put our heads out of the now motionless train's windows. Most passengers were crowded outside. It wasn't long before the police arrived on the scene. It appears that someone had been struck crossing the line. It was just one station before my intended destination. Someone remarked that the body was still lying there. I was about to have a look for myself when someone caught my hand firmly. It was none other than the fellow passenger with whom I had been talking throughout my 4-hour journey. There's nothing to see in that lifeless body. There is only a lot of blood and some mutilated limbs, he said. It would make you very upset. I hid my curiosity. It was 4:30 in the evening. My fellow traveller told me that he was also going to the same destination, so we hired a one-cycle van, being the only available transport for hire locally. We talked ceaselessly as we travelled along, sometimes about politics, sometimes about the present education scenario, and sometimes about the high casualty rate in the traffic system. However, I couldn't help my mind returning to that unseen body. Who had lost their precious life, I wondered. I was 26 years old. There are so many things to see in life. Death was something I just didn't want to think about. It was my first trip to Baharampur. A friend had invited me to spend a weekend at his home. I thought it would make a good escape from the clutter of Kolkata. It would be a change from the monotonous and weekly hustle-bustle of my everyday life. On finally reaching my friend's house, I decided to say nothing about the accident or my 10-minute cycle van journey. Actually, I had enjoyed that ride. Other than that mishap on the train, the whole journey had been most pleasant. I didn't want to make my friend unhappy by discussing sad things. Ankush, my longtime friend, was a good person, and his mother was anxious about the dish she was preparing for me. I didn't want to spoil anything that evening. Since I was a city dweller, they were worried that I might find their rural home, which lacked electricity, difficult to get used to. But I really enjoyed sitting on the roof of their home on that starry night, soaking up the atmosphere, drinking coconut milk, eating fresh vegetables and fruits, and just listening to his friends, whose native pronunciation of the very Bengali words I used was so very different from my own. They asked me endless questions about my work, my family, and myself, which I was pleased to answer. I tried to respond in as much detail as I was able to. They seemed pleased to hear that I am a writer. But before long, I was rescued by Ankush. Then one of his friends mentioned the accident that had killed an 18-year-old girl that very afternoon. Ankush said to me, "Hey, I think you must have been there. Did you see anything of it?" I told them everything I knew, and I explained the reason for my silence. To my utter surprise, they laughed uproariously, as though it was a common happening. Ankush said that, indeed, it was not a rare thing. They were quite accustomed to accidents on that railway line. I listened to what they were saying to each other, without taking any further part in the conversation. Ankush smiled at me, and tauntingly asked me if I was scared. On hearing this, I became angry. I didn't see that they had any right to accuse me of this. Bhuvan, one of the friends, said to me, "Well, you could go to where it happened, right now, alone. If you can, we can presume that you are not scared." I agreed. Accordingly, we immediately went to the place where the accident had happened, but deliberately kept a fair distance from the exact spot. They dared me to walk right up to the place where the young girl had been killed. It was barely visible, as it was lit only by the light from the stars and a partially concealed moon. Only the signal glowed red. Despite Ankush's protest, I started walking forward. It was really difficult for someone like me to accept this as fun. Nevertheless, I wanted to demonstrate to them that I was a brave man, that I could accept their silly dare. Walking in the dark was difficult, as stones were scattered everywhere. I found I was sweating as I walked, but it was a challenge that I simply had to win. Suddenly, before me, I saw this shadowy, white object, kind of quivering, exactly where I was headed. I stopped for a moment. It could be a hallucination, I reasoned. Again, I started walking forward. But now, the apparition was quite visible. It was a person, draped in white. That wraith-like thing was doing something. Who or what was it? Was this an illusion, or the possibility that it was something paranormal sent a chill running down my spine. I almost fell back with shock as someone put a hand on my shoulder. I just stopped breathing and closed my eyes. In that gloomy light, I found it was none other than Ankush, who had been following me. He also saw what I had been seeing. We drew closer and found what we had seen was an old person swabbing the place with water. There was no body, nothing of the dead girl. Etto rakto, so much blood, he was quietly saying to himself over and over. It turned out that he was the station master, whose son had died in the same way, in the same kind of accident, around 25 years earlier. On one such cold night, such as this was, he was being chased by police officers, and without warning, a train thundered down the tracks and ran over him. After that incident, the station master became mentally disturbed. He always took it upon himself to erase all evidence of such accidents. I live and work in Dubai, but this took place in Goa, India, where I went down for a vacation with my 2 daughters, my younger sister, and her boyfriend. It was July 2006, when we have the rainy season in India. We left from Mumbai at 5:30 a.m, and by the time we reached Goa, it was around 4 p.m. We were to stay in my sister's boyfriend's newly purchased house, which they used for vacation purposes, which meant that the house stood empty most of the time. After much cleaning of the house, we went to a nearby restaurant for dinner. By the time we got home, we were all so exhausted from traveling and cleaning that everybody fell asleep as soon as they put their heads on the pillow. In the middle of the night, I was awoken by someone stroking my hair. I got up and looked at my sister and her boyfriend, because he was naughty, always up to mischief. But they were both fast asleep. I laid down again, tried to close my eyes, And again, I felt someone touch my head in a very weird manner. I freaked out and I stayed awake the remainder of the night near my sister and her boyfriend. The next afternoon, I told my sister and her partner about this. She told me that she felt a presence in the bathroom while she was bathing. It was as if someone was watching her. This watched feeling was very strong in the kitchen and in the bathroom. I never felt threatened by it, but I did not like the being watched over feeling, especially in the bathroom. My sister's boyfriend got really freaked out. He would not go to the toilet or bathroom without my sister. We stayed there for 4 nights, but I never slept, not even for one night. The last night we were there, I actually saw a shadow peering at us from the kitchen. Maybe, whatever this thing is, was saying goodbye. I would like to tell you guys a small story that happened years ago in Mumbai. I was about 9 years old at the time. During the summer vacation, my uncle used to take me and my other siblings to a nearby park. Every evening, we went to the park, played on the swings, the slide, and the jungle gym. I was very naughty, and many times jumped off the top of the slide to show off to my younger siblings. One day, I was very sick, and I could not go to the park, so my uncle just went with my younger sisters. My youngest sister was about 4 at that time. Well, they were back early that day, and my younger sister had bruises on her hands and legs. She was taken to the doctor, who said she was okay and just had to rest a bit. When we asked her how did she get hurt, she told everybody that she was just following me. She said she saw me jump off the slide and thought, if I can do it, she can do it too. It was very weird. We did not know what to make of it. She kept on insisting that she was following me, that I was wearing a very white clothing. Mum thought that she must be imagining things, because I was home all the time, watching television. I certainly didn't own anything white. She was not very badly hurt. She fell on a man who was exercising next to the slide. This didn't happen to me. It happened to my grandma. My grandma was a teenager, like 16 or 17 around the time. This happened in India, and Indian girls used to make cotton with something called charka. They came back from making cotton, and it was late at night. My grandma and her fellow village girls were walking back when she heard some lady say one of the girls' names. She turned around and saw a lady with her hair open, big teeth. She had her feet and hands backwards, and she was laughing. While they watched her, she slowly started saying their names, one by one, and they got so scared that they left everything where it was and ran. Both my mum's side and my dad's side grandmas have experienced and know stories like these. They also said back then there were many things like these. My grandma also told me that this one, if you respond back or looked back at all, you would die. It was hard because you could never know who was calling out to you. I know of many stories like these. After hearing this story, I do believe that there are things like witches and angels and other not so nice things. This is a true story, though I still can't believe it happened to me. This is the time when I used to serve on ships in capacity of cadet. That was my first and last FG ship. The ship's name was MV Star Ruby. My whole crew was Indian. I still remember March '06. We were passing through the North Atlantic, heading for Italy. We were carrying wheat. In that passage, maintenance of hatch covers was due. Hatch covers are opening of holds in which we carry cargo, same like cover of some box. The weather was very fine, so hatches were partially open for number 1 hold, which is located in the foremost part of the ship. And at that time, painting work was going on, as we could not finish hold on that day. It was kept open so paint can get dry underneath the cover. At around 10:30 at night, the chief officer rang in my cabin, asked me to close the hatch. I put my shoes on, took a torch and informed the bridge. Upon reaching there, I started the pump and started closing operations. I closed one cover and went forward to close another. Suddenly, my torch stopped working. Rather than going back, I informed the bridge on walkie-talkie to switch on the forward lights. The third officer was on watch. He informed me that that'll take 2 to 3 minutes. Okay, while I wait, I light up a cigarette. I was enjoying the puffs when suddenly I heard some scratching noises behind me. I thought there must be a malfunction with the hatch cover, and I turned back with my usual alert. But I was completely frozen to see the view. There was a woman standing in some light clothes. She had short hair, and her face was not so clearly visible. I could not understand how I was able to see her in this dark, dark place. I could not make a single move. I wanted to shout, but such a thin voice was coming out of my mouth. Suddenly, she begins moving towards me. I wanted to move back, but my foot became like they are nailed on deck. She was continuously moving towards me, but with a slow speed. She took around 30 seconds to cover the distance of about 15 yards between us. Now, she was close as hell to me. Her face was just 5 inches ahead of mine, and I saw her very thoroughly. She was such a pretty lady, maybe about 35, from South American country maybe. In spite of her beauty, she was kind of this pale yellow. Most strange were her eyes, which were carrying sadness. Until I got comfortable with the whole situation, all 3 lights of 4-part were on. I moved my head towards the light in anticipation of hardly a second. I looked back to the lady. No sign of her. Suddenly, I lost consciousness. Pratap, are you all right? I came back, my mind catching up with the world. The chief officer was bending over me. He asked me softly as I opened my eyes, "Are you okay?" The chief officer was a nice guy. He didn't ask a single thing and told everybody to leave the room so I can rest. He instructed the duty seaman to take care of me in 2 to 3 hours intervals. The next day, I told everything to the chief officer. He told me not to take such things to heart, as it happens due to heavy workload on ships. Even I didn't take that incident seriously and forgot it like a horrible dream. The middle of April, next month, we had just loaded steel coils from Alexandria, Egypt. We were heading for the United States. It was my duty to go inside, take temperatures, that kind of thing. It was 4th day from departure. In the evening, I was doing the job, almost finished. I entered into number 5 hold, reached to the bottom, put the thermo on the floor, and started noting the readings. All of a sudden, I don't know why I turned back, but the same lady was sitting in the space between 2 coils. She had the same outfit, but today, she was weeping. I clearly could see her wet face. I gathered all my courage, and I asked her who she was. No answer. Again I asked, but nothing. I don't know how I could be so brave. I shouted her, and that was probably not a good idea. Suddenly, the ship started rolling. We were in the Mediterranean Sea, and that was so unexpected. That can be very dangerous due to the shifting of steel coils. So, the duty seaman, who was outside the hatch, took down some steps on the ladder and shouted at me to come up. Again, that attracted my attention, and as I looked back, again she is gone. After that incident, that lady became a part of my life. She began to appear everywhere, even in my sleeping quarters. After some days in the radio room, she appeared again. The frequency of her appearances increased greatly. I thought, this is high time to do something because this is affecting my work also. Thousands of times I asked her, "What do you want? In what way can I help you? Have I done something wrong to you?" But no answers. She used to just continuously stare at me. I told everything to the second officer now, who was comparatively close to me. He took everything seriously, and he made a report to the chief officer, who was apparently angry with me due to my frequent mistakes in my work. He told me that I'm pretending to get away from work. The second officer was not happy with this because he knew that I am a sincere person. Though he was not believing stories completely, but he agreed that something wrong is happening with me. That day, he called me into his cabin and we had some vodka. In that drunken state, I started crying, told him that maybe this is all psychological, but it is all true regardless. Why is it happening to me? I asked. I didn't even see the face of that lady before in my life. I haven't done anything wrong. All that. I spilled it all. In that state, I left his cabin and came back to mine. I just fell asleep on my bed and went off to sleep for the night. After midnight, I felt that somebody is pulling my bedsheet forcefully. I woke up, and that was worse. She was right there, standing in front of me. The lights were on and there was not much distance between us. She was wearing a bluish gown today, with some kind of Arabian-style cap on her head. In a few moments, my body was all wet from sweat, and I felt that my body was very heavy, that I cannot move. My hands, they begin shivering now. She took a step forward, then another. She came close to me, sat on my bed, and she put her hand on my forehead. After that, she said something in some strange language, but with a pleasant smile on her face. I couldn't understand a single word, but I had a feeling like she is saying, "Don't be scared of me. I will do nothing. Sleep now. You need that." She then began to massage my forehead, very softly, with a lot of love and affection in her eyes. In that moment, I forgot all my stress. She was continuously saying something like some lady singing a song for her baby. Her voice was soft, touching. I closed my eyes, and suddenly, the scene came across my mind when I was leaving home and my mother was weeping, and I saw her face for the last time. I started crying. She quickly got up from bed and went in the corner of the cabin. I asked her to come near, but she was so scared, like she had done something wrong to me. Suddenly, she crossed the bulkhead, the partition separation between two cabins, like some kind of smoke, and just disappeared. That was the first time I witnessed what I know is a supernatural phenomenon. I began crying heavily, not out of fear, but this time because she was gone. I was shocked, but after that, everything was not that bad, at least. The great soul was not at all dangerous, though she brought me a great change. I never think of her or call her as some devil or Buddh or anything like that. She's been a great memory to me. It's now almost 6 months. I left Spa Ruby. Due to my mother's constraints, I'm not allowed to join back, and that was my last FG ship. I still remember her face, with those big, blue eyes, and that deep, endless affection. My father always told me that ghosts did in fact exist. But me, being a skeptic, I never fully believed. But I would still spare a moment and listen to him tell the stories. My grandmother and my grandfather were not together at that moment, and from her part, she tells me that there is an evil shadow in the house, the one my grandfather and she had built. The shadow would be there because of an accident with her wedding ring, the one thing that turned my grandfather against her. The year was 1996. My mother, father, and I went looking for my godparents, and my dad wanted me to meet someone before our vacation came to an end. I can still remember the house and what it used to look like. It was a 2-story house, and its color was blue. Not like a dark blue or light blue, but rather an awkward shade of blue. There was no sparkle in that house. Not a single bright light entered that house. It had no life, no happiness, only sorrow. As I stepped out of my dad's van, he told me that the owner of the house was my grandpapa. I really didn't think much of it. I just wanted to see the house. But as I got closer to it, I suddenly felt this cold chill come upon me. And as I drew nearer, I saw this shadow-like figure just standing in the back room. No face, no body, nothing. Only that figure watching my every move. I turned around and ran back towards my dad, and I never looked back or went back there again. Later on, I found out that many also saw the figure, but not my grandpapa. He was blinded with so much guilt. He didn't care what was around him. When I lived in Mexico, I was constantly hearing and seeing many supernatural things. I was not as scared as I am now, but it was the worst and the best parts of my life. When I was 16 years old, and I heard this lady's voice calling my name while my body reached the state of sleep paralysis. I couldn't do anything. I tried to move, but I couldn't even open my eyes. I was trying to figure out if this thing in my room was maybe my mother. But then, it grabbed me by both ankles, and it moved me straight on my side. And as she did so, it laid down beside me. I tried to move my lips to speak, but I just babbled. Then, eventually, words finally came out. Are you my mother? I prayed, and I kept on praying. Then, I could finally open my eyes. But I knew she left by then. I suddenly heard the laughing voice of my mum, and by then, I knew it couldn't have been her, as the sound was coming from my neighbor's place. This ghost lady, she still stayed in the same house I lived in, but she started to become a bother to my mum, and my mother would constantly say a barrel full of curses, and the woman got mad and she kept continuously throwing my mother off the bed or doing things like tripping us over. I always heard my mum tell me about it, and she would tell my dad also, but he would never believe what she'd say, or me. Once she made it clear to him. One day, in November 20th, there would always be this festival at my hometown, and my father told me and my mum to go, and he would pick us up when it was over. In the middle of a dance, when I saw my dad, and when I was finished, I asked if it was time to go, but he answered, "No, we'll stay until it's over." When we got home, he told me and my mother what happened. When he was in bed for a little rest, he felt something moving the bed. He thought maybe it was an animal, but then he looked down and he saw nothing there, but clearly motion where the bed was being shaken. He fled that house like there was no tomorrow. Me and my mum were a bit surprised, but at least he finally believed us. This story happened about 7 years ago. I was coming out of the bathroom, turned off the light, and then, when I was going into the kitchen, I saw a hand visibly in the door, sort of like telling me to go there. I thought maybe it was one of my brothers, but as I came into the kitchen, I realized I was alone in the house. There was no one else. I was so scared. But after a while, I sort of forgot about it. That is until 2 to 3 years ago. Next to the kitchen is the living room, and sometimes I stayed up late doing my homework. This particular day, it was 4 a.m. My family had all gone to bed when I felt someone pass by, and a chill ran up my spine. At first I thought that it was someone in my family, but 1 hour passed and no one came back. So I got up and I went near the bathroom. I realized the light was on and no one was there. The next day, I was again in the same place doing homework, when suddenly, I felt that same surreal experience again. And almost every day that I stayed up until that time, I could always feel eyes watching me. Besides me, no one else in my family seems to feel or see anything. People who lived there before had said that they had seen fire. So, I never found out exactly what this was. My stories begin from the first time I was 5 or 6, I believe. My very first encounter with the paranormal began when my mum, dad, brother and me were visiting some family in Mexico City. We were staying in this house we used to own. Now, a little background on the town before I begin. Supposedly, the entire town was a battlefield type of location. Running through the town was a path that all the soldiers used to get to a certain location. Some people hear the sounds of what seems to be horses and men yelling, giving orders and whatnot. My grandmother lives right next door to a house which, she says, contains all of that paranormal activity, including hearing military men on horses, and sometimes seeing them as well. Back in that time, there was a lot of death because of the battles that were carried out. Any person that was killed was buried right there and then, wherever they were killed. So, it is said that the entire town is like a cemetery because none of the bodies have ever been removed from the ground. Also at that time, there were many people who would bury any type of money or fortune they may have had for fear of it being confiscated. So many of the houses in the town have these lots of money underneath them. In the house that we lived, there used to live a lady and her little son. Now, we were told from the very beginning by the person who sold them, the house had money buried there. Whether the money belonged to the lady, we were not really sure. But I know for a fact that this lady that lived there was the spirit I came in contact with as a child. I found all of this history out when I was 16, so I had no knowledge of anything that may have gone on when I was young. I remember we had just gotten to the house. It had been a while since we had visited, and it had been the second day that we were down near Mexico City. My parents were cleaning up the rooms, the ones that we were going to be staying in, and they decided that we would all stay in their room for the night. The next morning, this must have been around 7 a.m., I woke up to the sounds of footsteps in the room. Now, I was awake, but I kept my eyes closed, thinking it was my mother. The weird thing about all of this was that the footsteps seemed to be walking around the bed constantly. I finally sat up, and I could still hear those footsteps, but I could see no body attached to them. I knew that these footsteps were circling the bed. I would follow them, like I knew someone was there. I knew their exact location. Every now and then, the footsteps would stop, right on the side of the bed where I was, as if whatever it was observing me. Then, they would just continue. I was younger at that time, and for some reason I wasn't scared. I didn't feel like it was threatening in any way. But I did tell my dad the next morning. He said that it was probably someone on the roof trying to get in. I told him that I was sure it was coming from inside the room. I told him that I was following the footsteps, but he just brushed it off. Also, when I was 16, it must have been 3 years before our last visit, and my aunt was living in that house. She said that when they walked in, on the wall in the dining room, there were, in big letters, the name Letty. Those letters seemed to have been carved into the wall somehow. She didn't think much of it until she started painting the room. She was painting over it when she said her paintbrush flew out of her hand and hit the wall behind her. It was then that this started to interest me. I asked one of my other aunts if she knew anything about the house, and she told me about that lady and her son. How they have been seen at my house. I know this is long and I apologize, but I felt that this was the beginning of all of the things I have experienced throughout my life. If you believe me or not, that's really up to you. But I ask that you have the same respect as I will give you. Any thoughts on this tale are welcome. If you don't know already, I live in Oaxaca, Mexico. My house is very old, and many things happen here. My first experience was with my grandma. My parents had gone out to Mexico City to visit my aunt who was ill. My grandma had flown in to take care of me and my brother William. I was 10 at the time, and Will was 13. We were not really into the whole supernatural stuff. It was summer at the time, and of course it was raining pretty hard. My grandma, Will, and I were cuddled in my parents' king-size bed watching the news when we heard these heels coming in and into the kitchen. My grandma tried to look out the door and asked, in Spanish of course, "William, go see who came in. It's maybe your sister, Teresita." He reluctantly got off the bed and went into the kitchen. Came back very fast. There is no one there. It was probably the TV or something. We soon shrugged this off and went to sleep. Later in the night, we hear the same heels again. But this time, it was getting closer. It seemed to stop at the edge of the bed on Will's side. I woke up very fast, and Will was sweating. I poked him in the stomach, and he woke up. "What's wrong?" He shook his head and went back to sleep. I poked him again. "Are you crazy or something?" He shook his head. "No, why?" I wiped his forehead, and my hands got wet. "You're sweating. What's going on?" He shrugged and took off the sheets. When I woke up in the morning, Will looked very pale, and he had been throwing up. I'm still confused as to why he got sick when the heels stopped by his bed. I want to understand what happened. And this is not the only incident. This encounter happened a few weeks after our first one, the Sound of Heels story. My brother William had gone out with friends, and my parents were at work, so I was alone. I didn't mind very much. It was getting late, so I decided to make myself food and watch television. Whilst I was watching TV, I heard one of the bedroom doors slam. I thought it must be Will, so I just ignored it. About 15 minutes passed, and I heard a door slam and lots of chattering. I was trying to watch the show, and the noise bothered me, so I yelled, "Shut up!" It stopped for a while, and then something got thrown. I thought maybe Will was playing soccer in his room again, and I turned up the volume. As soon as the volume reached 54, Will came through the door. "Turn it down. You can hear it from far away." I turned off the TV, and I noticed that he had been out the whole time. But as I was going downstairs, a book had evidently made its way to the bottom of the staircase. I noticed that the book did not belong to me, and I had never seen it. I picked it up, and William saw that I had it. He grabbed it out of my hand. "Why are you touching my stuff?" I shot back. "I'm not. It was just on the floor here. Someone threw it while I was watching TV." He gave me this look of disbelief. After about 3 weeks, William also started hearing chattering. The same chattering that I had heard. Will called me, and I ran upstairs to see where it was coming from, but it just faded away. I suppose it was coming from Will's room, because he said that he heard movement in his closet and someone in there talking. We made my mum check the closet more than 10 times, and still, we couldn't find anything. For at least a week, Will slept in my room because he said that people were talking in his room. Even now, you can sometimes hear those voices, but we don't really know where it's coming from. The only thing that I don't understand is why the book was thrown down the stairs. I guess because the person wanted me to be quiet too. I don't even know. About a year ago, my granny died. I had been sleeping in my dad's study while she slept in my room. When she died, we left the bed how it was, and a month later, I started sleeping in my room again. The first night was okay, but when a week flew by, I started getting nightmares. I always saw the same man in my dreams, always. He was very clean and wore a suit. I never quite saw his face, but he would seem to do very nasty things. The strange thing was, it was only when I slept in my room alone that I would get nightmares. I didn't tell anyone because I thought it was nothing. 5 months had passed, and the nightmares got worse and worse. I could never seem to wake up from them. I would end up walking in the middle of the night, and right when I woke up, my cat, Medusa, would be immediately by my side. I finally got up the courage to tell my neighbor. I discussed it with her, and I told her that I thought the man in the suit might be the devil. I was very scared to go to sleep, so I just started staying up. One night, I awoke and I felt a pain in my leg. There were 3 scratches on my upper thigh. I ignored this, but I realized I had to tell my mum or dad. I told my mum, but she just said it's all in my head. But the thing is, right before my grandma died, I had a nightmare. I finally decided to tell my dad. I told him everything, except about the scratches on my upper thigh. He brought a blessed rosary and a dream catcher, and he put them above my bed. I stopped having nightmares for a while, about 9 months. Then, my cat passed away, and they came back. They were not coming as often though, and only every now and then. When I do have nightmares, it's the same one, over and over again. My brother said it's my conscience. I haven't really done anything bad. I'm very frightened sometimes about what's going to happen to me in my dream, because it doesn't ever end. I usually wake up right before something happens to me. It's not an old house. It isn't built over a cemetery. Neither was it any kind of clinic before. I've been living in this house all my life. It all began one night. I fell asleep. Let's explain how my room is. My bed is at one side, feet to the door, and one complete side is along a wall, so that if you are laying, you will have the wall on your left side and the door on your right side, near your feet. One night, I suddenly woke up and turned my head away from the wall, and I saw someone entering to my room. The first thing I thought was, it's my dad. But no, this thing just walked towards my bed, squatted, and stayed like that, just looking at me. I tried to turn to watch it better, but I couldn't. I could just hear it laughing. Not an evil laugh, more like this chittering noise. After a few moments like that, he just stood up and walked out of my room. This repeated some more nights, until one night, when I awoke, I saw him at my door, pointing at someone or something outside, and shouting at me, "He's there! He's there!" A moment later, I could feel something holding my neck so hard I couldn't breathe. I was just lying on my back, feeling like I was sinking into my bed, until I saw him trying to release me from that thing that was holding my neck. I've never been able to see quite clearly that thing, shadow, person or phantom, but I can sense it's a man. But what is he doing in my house? Why, after all these years, why does he suddenly appear and first laugh at me, and then seemingly saves me from this other something? My father built me a house 5 years ago. It was located at the back of our house, where my family is living. It was a present to me after I've made it to college. I didn't have any idea that this was not the dream house that I've always wanted, but a house that I will later regret having. So, after graduation, I lived in that house. It was very nice. Like I'm living in an exclusive villa in an expensive subdivision. But I started to feel that I wasn't alone there on the first night I slept there. While I'm in a deep slumber, my mobile phone alarm rang at exactly 3 a.m. I was still sleepy, so I reached for it with my hands while still keeping my eyes closed. But I can't barely touch it. It's not sitting at the place where I usually put it before going to bed. Slowly, I open my eyes, and then, to my surprise, I see a lady in front of my bed. More like a silhouette of a lady that is standing right in front of me. I closed my eyes again, and I hid myself under the blankets. I don't scream. I don't know what's up with me. But all I know is I'm not alone in my room, in my house, in my own home. Several times, I experienced an old lady in my bathroom, children playing in my kitchen, a man hiding under the stairs, and that lady in my room. I was always scared, every day of my life. It's like I'm living in hell. My life is consumed by fear for years on end. When I realized it, they're not causing me harm. I think they are friendly, and they just don't like me living alone in that house. That's why they come there and decided to stay, so that I'm not alone. Day by day, different kinds of sightings happen in that house. Even my friends see them living with me at times. But I think they are not harmful, so I'm not scared anymore. Believe it or not all ghosts you will see can cause you harm. When I see them, I feel them, and I smile at them. Though sometimes I am frightened. These people who are not with us are helping me in some way. Ghosts are definitely not real. Those were my words before we started our trip up the mountains of Baguio City. A group of delegates from our grade school department were going to a leadership seminar in one of the most haunted places in the Philippines. Plenty of ghost stories come from that dreaded place where we were about to stay for 6 days. It was known for its old age and the rumors that it was built on top of a war-related area. People supposedly see ghosts of war veterans and enemy soldiers kidnapping women. I thought that I would never experience anything like that. But I was wrong. The first day of the trip was fun, as I remember. We went biking around the park there, and we hung out in the hotel room of one of the delegates' parents. I didn't even think about the place we were really supposed to stay, until, of course, I saw our hall in teachers' camp. The camp was enormous, plenty of halls we could have stayed in. But of all the halls we were assigned to white hall. The oldest, and the one in the worst condition. The floor would creak with every step, and because of an opening between the ceiling and wall, you could hear everything from chattering teachers to the bags of others dragged on the floor. Our toilets didn't even work well, so every day I dreaded coming back to that hall at night. The long-awaited first night in our room finally came, and as usual, I didn't sleep well. I always have difficulty sleeping, whether at home or a creepy camp. Room 109 was our assigned quarters. 4 other girls stayed in the room with me, and they were comfortable with the place. Just a bit disgusted at the counterproductive toilet. Anyway, as I was saying, I didn't sleep well at all. I was awake until the hours of 11, desperately trying to sleep. Of course, I left the lights on, fearing something might go bump that night. Finally, I fell asleep for around 4 hours, and I woke up again at 3. Screw sleep, I thought. Luckily, I had brought with me an interesting book from my sister. I read undisturbed, yet still a bit paranoid for a few minutes, until I heard something. Footsteps. Faint, yet coming closer. I stopped reading, and I waited if they'd actually get louder. They did. Before anything got any louder, I actually peeked outside my room, finding nothing. Nothing but the footsteps kept on coming. Stronger, closer, as it headed down from the stairs across the room. I went back to my bed, and I just stayed there, sitting upright, my ears eagerly taking in the footsteps. I was nervous. I tried to calm myself, saying that there were late guests coming in. But then the footsteps reached the entrance of the room, so roughly that I felt the bed move whenever it sounded. I freaked out a bit, and I hid my head under the blanket. Hurriedly, I recited my prayers, while my friends slept soundly. I feared that I would see something that I would remember for the rest of my life. The footsteps felt as if it was coming towards my bed. Then, it stopped. I lifted enough courage to look up from my blanket, and I saw a white, shady figure with a somewhat bloodied face. It was only for a few seconds, until I finally got the urge to hide myself from it. I hid under the blanket again. The footsteps ensued, but this time grew fainter and fainter until it was gone, just like the figure. I was so scared, I could barely get to sleep. For the passing days, in room 109, nothing else happened. I did tell my friends about this experience, and they just laughed about it. I know what I saw. Whether it was a ghost or just my mind playing paranoid tricks on me. I still go to teachers' camp, and I still hear stories of the hauntings, even ones very similar to mine. But hearing or reading ghost stories can never amount to the thrill of experiencing one. Have you ever had an encounter with a spirit, an entity, or something paranormal, but you were not aware of it until someone told you? This is such an experience, which I had in the office when I was working late. So, before I start the story, let me get into the details first. I work in a call center here in Manila, Philippines. So since we have to adjust our schedule to the country we are catering, most of us in the call center would normally work the graveyard shift. Okay, so on with my story. I had this experience with a little boy in the elevator. He was about 3 feet tall, and he was always wearing blue. We would always share the elevator during my break at 3 a.m, and he would always go down to the 4th floor. My office was located on the 6th floor, by the way. I would always bid him goodbye, and he would just walk away without saying a word. There were times when I tried talking to him, but he would just put his head down and he would not talk. So, I was scared that I might offend him with my talking. So every time I saw him, I would just keep quiet. After a few encounters with the kid, I started thinking of certain things. Firstly, whose parents does this kid belong to? And 2, what is he doing in the building during these hours? After a few days of not seeing the kid anymore, and with some luck, I finally had the chance to catch the guards downstairs in the lobby to ask them about the kid. Because usually, during the graveyard shift, they would be doing their routine rounds in the building. What happened next made the hair on the back of my neck rise. I told the guards that I have been seeing a young boy on the elevator, and I asked who he was and what he might be doing in the building during those late hours. One of the guards smiled and said, "Little boy blue, 4th floor, right?" And I told him he was right, and asked what was on the 4th floor. "Nothing," he exclaimed. It turned out that the 4th floor had been vacant for 3 years now. They also told me that sometimes, when they are making their rounds, that they would spot the boy on the 4th floor, running through corners of the hallway, and when they would turn to look where the boy went, they would find no one there. I could feel my face turning pale and my heart pounding with fear. After that, I never did have an encounter with the kid anymore. But sometimes, the elevator still stops on the 4th floor, and you could hear a giggle of a little boy in the cold and wide hallways of the Harrison building. This is one story that still haunts me until this day. I'm the type of person who does not believe in ghosts, but have learned to respect their reasons for being on our plane. I belong to a group of friends who were really into the paranormal things that are happening around us. Being in this type of crowd, I could not help myself in believing a swell with the way they tell their stories and being dragged into opening my sixth sense. Call it peer pressure, I guess. But I suppose that's just the way it is. For a few days, nothing out of the extraordinary was happening. So I told myself, maybe it didn't work. Given the fact that I did not believe in those types of beings, I thought perhaps the ceremony had no effect on me. Then it happened. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night and wanted a glass of water. I was so thirsty that I could not wait until morning, so I went down for a cold drink. After filling my glass with water from the container, I closed the fridge's door. Standing beside me was a white figure with bloody red eyes. I was so scared that I dropped the glass on my hand and I closed my eyes and prayed. When I opened my eyes, there was no one there, so I figured it was just my imagination. To help me sleep, I had this great idea of watching television to help me doze off. So I got the remote and I pointed to the direction of the television. Before I could even turn the TV on, I saw on the black screen that the white figure was now standing right behind me with a big grin on her face, this time together with her bloody red eyes. This was the last straw. I ran up to my mum's room and I slept beside her until morning came. The next day, I asked the group to take their so-called gift away from me. I could not take it anymore. I never again want to see that white figure. It's funny when certain events in our lives occur, and we blame it all on bad luck. What's funnier is the things that we do to encounter the flow of bad energy that causes these so-called bad luck or bad events. At least, at that time I thought it was funny. Until my friend shared her unlikely experience. This story is about my friend and her scary jeepney ride going home. For those of you who don't know what jeepneys are, they are a popular means of public transport in the Philippines. They were originally made from US military jeeps left over from World War II, and they are well known for their flamboyant decoration and crowded seating. My friend went home late after finishing their school project. Now, since she lives within the vicinity of the UP Dillman campus, University of the Philippines, I mean, it was perfectly safe for her to take the jeepney instead of taking a taxi and going home during these late hours. It was about midnight when she took the ride home, and she could not help but notice the driver kept on glancing at her through his rearview mirror, and then he would turn to her. Now, all jeepneys have their own route and do not take any turns, and they have to stick to their route, or else there is a big chance that they would run into some cop trouble. What's odd about this jeepney ride, besides the eerie glances that the driver gave from time to time, he was also taking turns in corners that he was not supposed to. Afraid of what the driver's plans were, she was even more afraid of her surroundings, because it seemed as if she was in the middle of nowhere already. So instead of going down, she just stayed on the Jeep. On the last turn that the driver made, she noticed that they were back on the route that they were supposed to be on in the first place. Before reaching the end of the terminal, the driver turned to my friend and said, "I'm sorry if I scared you or startled you. It was not my intention. Could you do me a favor and burn all your clothes when you get home?" Wondering why, my friend asked why he was acting very strange. The driver explained, "The reason why I kept glancing was because your head was not attached to your body when I looked through my rearview mirror. That is why I changed my route a while ago, hoping that we could get away from the bad energy present in that area. That's why you need to burn all your clothes when you get home, because I think it's still with you." Upon arriving home, still shaking from fear, my friend took all her clothes off and burned them as quickly as she could. A few days later, she found out on the news that the jeepney driver died a day after the incident. It turned out the warning was not for her, but for the driver. Ever wondered how things came to be the way they are? Why some places give us this eerie feeling when we pass through it? Why we meet people who give us this uncomfortable feeling, even if they are not doing anything? Ever picked up money on the street or on a sidewalk? Lucky, huh? But did you ever wonder who it belonged to and why it was lying there in the first place? History was never my thing. For me, everything and anything bad from the past should be left there and should be forgotten through time. But what if you had a thing or an object that links you to an event that has happened in the past? Would you let it go? Or would you be thankful that you have it? This story took place on my grandmother's house, where I had my summer vacation. I love spending time there because there is a lot that a person can do inside and outside of her house. She has a big pool, a big flat-screen TV, tennis and basketball court. All the amenities you could think of, that is, or should be, found in your modern home. That is why the 1980s looking cabinet she had on the living room seemed a bit off or out of place. So I asked my grandmother where she got the cabinet and if it was new. She made a joke about it and she told me, "It's from the 80s, dear. I doubt that is new." With a smile on her face, she told me that she just passed by an antique shop 2 weeks ago when the cabinet caught her eyes. She thought it was very pretty, so she bought it. I was having the time of my life and everything was great. I had 2 weeks vacation time and I was only on my 3rd day. Everything was okay, except for the loud thuds that kept me awake at night. I did not pay much attention to it, because when I asked what that was, it turned out some men were working on some renovations to the house next door. They were on a tight schedule, so some of the men worked even at night. And even though the sound seemed different, I just took their word for it. I didn't want to ruin my time with thinking there were ghosts in the house. One evening, I was watching a late-night movie when I heard the loud thuds again. This time, it seemed as if they were coming from inside the house. I was worried, thinking it might be someone trying to break in. So I followed the sound, just to look. The sound seemed to be coming from the living room. The weird thing was, as I got closer, I could hear some screeching and scratching sounds after the thuds. What I saw was the most horrifying thing I have ever seen. No amount of scary movies or Hollywood effects could have prepared me for what I saw that night. It was an old lady, soaked with blood. I thought the loud thuds were footsteps, but it turned out those were her hands banging on the floor. The scratching sounds, her long nails as she scratched, dragged herself across the room. She was clearly crippled and couldn't walk. It also seemed as if some of her bones were out of place, because some of her body parts were all deformed. She was crying out for help. She had no eyes and only had a blue, eerie light that seemed to be coming from the back of her head that lit through her eye sockets. I ran to the maid's quarters, given the fact that it was closer than where my grandmother's room was located. I woke everyone up and I told them what I saw. When we came back, of course, the floor was spotless, clean, and nothing was there. The next day, I convinced my grandmother of returning the old cabinet to the store. Upon returning the cabinet, my grandmother asked who was the previous owner. It turned out that an old lady used to own the cabinet. One day, she just disappeared. Some say she went home without anyone knowing. Some say she was brutally murdered. Some say she was beaten to death and was stashed somewhere. But no one actually knows what became of her. No evidence was located. No body ever found. Neither my grandmother nor I said a word. We were speechless, and we couldn't figure out what to do or say. We just left the cabinet there, and we turned and went home. The weird thing about the story of this old lady was that no one even bothered to investigate on her case to learn the truth. Her family just tried to make some money out of her belongings, and that was it. But the weirdest part of all of this is the people who hear this story sometimes claim that they see the old woman every now and then, asking for help, crying out, curled up inside their own cabinets. always believed in ghosts, and I wished to see one for myself, to experience the thrill that everybody else is experiencing once they encounter things like that. I do not believe that I'm the type of person who has the ability to feel and see spirits like a medium. I don't have a third eye to recognize them. Not until the following encounter. My first encounter with spirits happened when me and my ex were hanging out together in our house. We were talking about it because she has the third eye. She can see ghosts and feel spirits around. We are in the midst of the story when suddenly the picture frame on the wall falls down to the ground. That was not right, because nobody pulled it off, and this one, it cannot be pulled easily without human force. The fan is off, and the air outside the house, it is not enough to do that. I looked at my girlfriend with questions. She just bowed her head and told me to stay inside. She went out of the house, and then I heard her talking to somebody else, but I didn't see her. I didn't see anyone except for my girlfriend. She then came back and told me that everything was all right. She already spoke to the person who did it. It was a spirit from their house who followed her. It's apparently a white lady who gets very jealous. She told me that everywhere she goes, spirits are following her, and she almost forgot about it when she visited me. She asked me the time my mum and my little brother were coming home. I told her I didn't know. Maybe a minute from now. She didn't leave me from that moment until my mum arrived. An hour later, my mum came home and we bid each other goodbye. After we arrived home, I began to feel dizzy and felt a coldness wrapping my entire body. My mum advised me to go to bed, and she covered me with a blanket. One blanket was not enough, so she added one more. Still, I felt so cold, even though I was wrapped up with 2 blankets. I then texted my girlfriend, and worried about my condition, she called up and told me to wear anything that has a cross or God's image on it. I grabbed the rosary from the altar and I wore it. After 30 minutes, I started to feel the heat coming from the wrapped blanket and sweat began to drip off my face. I called my girlfriend back, told her that I was starting to feel better already. She then told the shocking truth that I had been touched by the white lady when they got off from the house. After that encounter, I did not wish for my girlfriend to open my third eye. I'm afraid to see more of these and feel that odd feeling again. I'm now contented to watch scary movies and hear ghost stories everywhere. I realized that having the power to see them is not always good after all. Have you ever felt eerie when you visit a hospital? A feeling that someone is watching you. I am a nurse, and I used to work in one of the oldest and most historic hospitals in Manila. In this hospital, I was assigned to one of the most exciting areas, the operating room complex. This area is divided into two distinct blocks. The right block is where all the scheduled operations take place, whereas the left block takes care of the emergency, trauma, and OBG cases. The whole complex, it is quite haunted, and each block has its own collection of ghosts, seen and felt by numerous nurses, residents, and surgeons. It was one ordinary working day. I was assigned the night shift, going on duty from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. the following day. My friend and I, we were discussing the presence of a ghost on our wing, since she saw one the night before. I was telling her that I had heard the voice of a little girl when I was assigned to the other block. She laughed and said that the ghosts in this block were more aggressive and really made their presence felt, since most of the patients have died in this particular block, and they have suffered traumatic accidents, like being stabbed or shot. Most are not prepared to die, let alone move on. I entered the operating room, where I was assigned. I relieved the nurse from the previous shift. As soon as I was assisting the surgeon with the case that they were performing, one of them asked me what my friend and I were talking about. I said, we were just talking about the ghost she saw last night in room 11. They asked me if I believed in such things, and I answered that I did believe in ghosts, since I have felt their presence in the OR complex. Almost all the rooms are haunted. They then told me about their own eerie experiences in the same complex. The operation was taking longer than I expected. We took a break while waiting for the X-ray technician and his machine to arrive. We asked the circulating nurse to provide us with some seats. We took our seats, and after some time, I was beginning to nod off. I suddenly felt a cold hand or a finger touch my cheek. I opened my eyes to see if my co-nurses were playing a trick on me. I saw that the rest of the team was asleep, and the other nurses were busy, since there were other procedures being done in the other rooms. I decided that it was just my imagination. I was falling asleep again. The presence was not satisfied with just touching my cheek. It became bolder, more intense. It nudged the chair where I was sitting. After this, I just stood up, fully awake now. Goosebumps all over my arms and legs. I looked for my co-nurses, leaving the sleeping surgeons to fend for themselves. It was nearly 7 p.m. when we reached my friend's grandmother's house in the province near our school. We were there to spend the night doing our thesis, required to finish our course, and there were 7 in our group. The house belonged to Melissa's grandmother. No one was in there, aside from a caretaker who left after he handed us the key. We suited ourselves and prepared our dinner. After the meal, we decided to do our projects. It was already 2 a.m. when we finished up and decided to go to bed. There were 3 rooms in this house. We were 4 girls and 3 boys, so we took the other room, while the boys took the room on the other side. The other one left was Melissa's grandmother's room. Before going to bed, Andrea, one of our friends, asked Melissa about the house. She told us that her third eye was open and she felt something in there. We were frightened of what she said and told her to stop it. But Melissa said that the house was known in the town as being haunted, since no one was really staying there. Her grandmother was staying with her family, since she was too old to be alone in that house. Suddenly, we felt as if someone was watching us. We went to the room and decided to sleep. Around 5 a.m., Andrea woke me, and she was chilled and could not control it. She asked us if we could leave already, but it was too early. We wanted to sleep late. I told her to go back to sleep again. She said that she couldn't, and could I just come with her outside? She just needed some fresh air to breathe. I wanted to scream at her, but when I looked at her, she was white, as if she had no blood running in her veins. I woke up the rest of the girls. Andrea was already freaking out and crying. We went outside, and Melissa gave her some water. She calmed down a bit and began to tell us the story that scared us and gave us total chills to the bone. When we went to bed, we went to sleep fast, since we were all tired. But Andrea could not sleep. She had heard noises, like footsteps outside the rooms, and whispering. She ignored this and went to sleep. It was as if there were other people in the house, but still she fell asleep. She awakened about 3:45, and what she told us next scared us to death. She said that she closed her eyes and tried to get some sleep again, but still couldn't. When she opened her eyes, she saw a lady in front of her, looking down at her face. She smiled at her wickedly and said, "You can see us, can't you?" These other people then came closer to her. That's when she woke me, chilled and crying. We waited until the sunrise, packed our things, and went back to the city. None of the boys knew what happened. No one would surely believe us. So, why waste our energy telling them? After all, we were still drained when we reached our dorm. I was packing my things when my roommate Diana went in. We are studying on different schools, but we are roommates for 3 years. She was jolly and nice, but that afternoon, she looked sad. I asked her what was wrong with her, but she assured me she's okay. She's just tired, so I didn't bother her. She lies on her bed and closed her eyes. When I finished doing my things, I bid her goodbye. She rose, hugged me, and told me to take care. I smiled at her and told her to give me a call if ever she needs someone to talk to. I am going home for the weekends, as my routine for 3 years. I was thinking of Diana on my way home As I reached home, I decided to call her, but I cannot reach her. I started to get worried. I told my mum about it, and she told me that maybe she was sleeping, maybe her phone is low battery. I dismissed the thoughts that are coming in my mind. I am not feeling good on whatever is happening on her. Around 9:15 p.m, after our dinner, I receive a call from her. I told her I was worried about her, and it's a good thing she called. Stop worrying. I'm okay. I just want to tell you, you're so nice. I'll miss you. What are you talking about? I will be back on Sunday afternoon. You never miss me during weekends. This sounded weird now, and my hands got cold. Are you not going home? I asked her. No. Look, I need to go now. Good night. Just send my regards to your mum. Okay, I'll tell her. Bye. She cut the line, and my heart was still pounding fast. I told my mum Diana is okay. She just called me and she sends you her regards. After a few minutes, my cell phone rang. It was our landlady. She was crying, freaking out. I cannot understand what she is saying. I told her to calm down. Just tell me what happened. She told me that at around 8:45 p.m, they heard a noise from our room. So she decided to come and see. She knocked and called for Diana because she knows that I had already left that afternoon. But there is no response. So she opened the door. She almost got a heart attack when she saw Diana hanging from the ceiling. She then called the other boarders and asked for help. But when they got Diana down, she was no longer breathing. They tried to revive her while the ambulance was on its way, but she was gone already. I was speechless. She just called me a few minutes ago. It can't be true. The hair on my nape rose. My blood runs cold. I don't know what to say. Are you still there? Our landlady asked me. Yes. Where is she now? We already called her parents. They are on their way to pick up her body. Her body? I can't believe it. We ended the call, and I told my mother what happened. She also cannot believe what happened. The following day, we went to Diana's place for the funeral. I still can't believe everything happened just like that. I told her mum about our last talk. She cried and told me that she also received a call from Diana, but that was before she did it. Until now, I cannot believe what happened. I am just praying that wherever she is, she's just okay. Like what she told me. I heard this story from my Lola a long time ago when I was only 14 years old. The story began when my Lola was in high school. It was after school when she met her two friends, Myrna and Zushild, by the school gate. They always meet there to walk back home together. She said that all three of them walk every day together, to and from school. They all lived right next door to each other, and it had always been their routine. After all, we are stronger by numbers, right? One day after school, when they were walking home, my Lola looked down and noticed that her friend on the right, Zushild, my Lola was in the middle of the two girls, saw that Zushild's shadow looked a little off. She kept looking at Myrna's shadow, her own shadow, then back to Zushild's shadow. But she cannot believe how this shadow did not have a head. So she quickly pointed it out to both of her friends, since they were too busy talking and didn't notice this unusual event that was happening. She said that Zushild didn't act like she was scared, but that she was curious. Why didn't her shadow have a head? So they tried to change and switch positions several times. But no matter what they did, Zushild's shadow still came out with no head. As they reached their village, they saw that Zushild's shadow was back normal. She had her head again. She said they all parted ways and went their separate ways home. But little does she know, that would be her last time seeing her friend Zushild alive. The next day, her friend Myrna came knocking, almost banging anxiously at Lola's door. When she opened, Myrna was all hysterical and crying. My Lola tried to calm her down so that she can talk and tell her what happened. When Myrna was able to talk, she told my Lola that Zushild's parents found her in bed, passed away. At first, they thought that she just overslept. So after calling her several times, her mum decided to go to her room and wake her up. She said that as soon as Zushild's mum tried to touch her, to shake her to wake up, she felt Zushild's body all cold. That's when they realized that she was dead. To this day, they don't know what caused the sudden death of Zushild. She said that the parents said it was pneumonia that caused it. But no one believes it, because Zushild was fine just that day before. She did not show any kind of sickness when they went home that night. My Lola firmly believes that it was something evil that took her friend's life, and it gave them a sign or warning by taking her shadow's head. I was born and raised in the Philippines. We moved to the US when I was 7 years old, but this story took place in the Philippines when I was 7. I can recall some of the stuff that happened to me, but not to the fullest. My uncle retold the story again to me later, when I got a bit older. And then, from time to time, when we have family gatherings, someone in the family would retell the story again, as it was a bit mind-boggling. The story started when my dad and I went to visit his sister, my aunt, and my cousins in the province. My aunt has 3 children. One is my age, and the other 2 are a couple of years older than I was. When we got to their house, I remember my aunt and cousins came running out of the house to greet us with such joy and excitement. After the initial visiting, my cousins and I went outside to play hide and seek. My older cousin was the seeker, while everyone else hid. My aunt's house was out in the woods. Her house was surrounded by mountains and trees after trees and tall grasses. There is this belief in the Philippines that most duendes lives in the forest or a place where there's lots of trees. And if you cross their path without saying "tabi tabi po, no," meaning pardon or excuse me little people, they will cast you a bad spell. It all depends on the duende you come across. Some are nice, some are evil. If you cross an evil duende, he or she can cast a death wish on you. Some can give you warts all over your body, make you ugly and hideous, so people will be disgusted of you and don't want to be around you. Back to playing hide and seek. My cousin was the seeker, and everyone else hid. I wanted to hide where my cousin couldn't find me, so I saw this really big tree, what seemed to be like 100 years old tree. Around it, I found this little hole, and that's where I hid. Without thinking and forgetting what my elders told me about duendes, I forgot to say "tabi tabi po." I hid for a long time in that tree. After what seemed like forever of hiding, I came out of the hole and went back up to where my cousins were. They said that they have given up looking for me, since they couldn't find me anywhere. That evening before dinner, I remember I started not feeling too good. I remember getting the shivers, the many trips to the bathroom vomiting, and after that, I can honestly say that I don't remember what else happened. But my dad and my aunt told me that I was practically in a coma for 3 days. They said that in some cases, I was hallucinating. I would sweat heavily, laugh, cry, and sometimes I was talking to someone in front of me, as if someone was right there. But, of course, there was no one. They even took me to a local hospital, but the doctors couldn't tell my family what was wrong with me. So, my aunt asked the kids what we did outside. My cousins told my dad and aunt that all we did was play hide and seek. They said that I was gone a long time and that they couldn't find where I hid. My dad and my aunt then knew that maybe I was victim to an evil duende. They took me to a witch doctor to find out what was wrong with me. As my dad explained to me, he said that as soon as they brought me inside to the witch doctor's house, the doctor knew that I was being played or something evil was in my presence. The witch doctor lit a candle, took a tub and poured about 1 inch or 2 of water in it. Then, she mixed a few drops of some special oil that comes from a plant with the water. She was chanting in some strange language. She took the lit candle and poured the melted wax into the tub with the water and oil. As she poured the wax, a figure started to form. My uncle said that the melted wax on the water formed this huge tree with the hole. Inside the hole was a human. This was supposed to be me. And around me was about 4 or 5 duendes. Some were just standing there staring at me, while others looked like they were throwing something at me. So the witch doctor had advised my family to take me back to that big tree and to say, "Tabi tabi po, no." and bring some fruits for offerings. That same day, my dad and aunt took me to the tree and excused me from any wrongdoings and brought with them plenty of fruits. All I remember was waking up the next day without any recollections of what the hell had happened to me. Hey guys, before I go, I would just like to give a big shout out and thank you to my Patreon supporters, Cerise Death, King Jim 97, Endos, Ellie Cat 80, Michael Sullivan, and Math Bowers. If you're interested in becoming a patron or channel member, do check out the links down in the description. Alrighty guys, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next video. Good night.